Thank you. I'm a little hoarse.
I am too.
But yesterday I cut a thing for the Seahawks for opening game, welcoming the 12s home.
Wow.
Said the flags are flying, the fans are here, the noise is rising. Welcome home, 12s.
I love it. Did you get that?
I did.
Oh. You say when, Jeremy?
When? Ready to go.
We are with Pat O'Day, and we're on the floor of the Washington State House of Representatives. Here is the fellow who is in the disc jockey division of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, one of the most legendary radio voices of the Northwest, and as a concert promoter nationally. But I want to start with a story that I had never heard before that really focuses on an unknown aspect of 1968. In 1968, Governor Daniel J. Evans was running for a second term.
Right.
Slade Gorton, the attorney was a state representative, was running for attorney general.
Right.
The Secretary of State, A. Ludlow Lud Kramer, was running for re-election, and the Republicans were looking for a candidate to run for lieutenant governor against John Sherwood.
Right.
And tell us what happened. Tell us how you were approached to be a candidate for lieutenant governor.
Norton Clapp, who was, of course, one of the scions of the Weyerhaeuser family, and his son Jim approached me. Now, Jim and I were friends. We had done all kinds of things together and eventually developed an unlimited hydroplane together. But we were just buddies. And because I had bought one of their first lots in Newport Shores, and built the third house in Newport Shores in Bellevue. You look at that today and you go, oh my God. But anyway, we'd become friends, and they approached me and told me they would fund it and they would guide it up, but they wanted me to run for lieutenant governor. And that was an honor, but it was out of the question. That's not me. I'm a radio guy, right? I love getting on the radio and doing broadcasting and rock and roll dance promotion and so on. And a joy that it would be and an honor that it would be. That just wasn't my. So they asked me for another suggestion, and I said, why don't you ask Bill Muncey? He's a well-known name, and he's respected and so on. So they went to Muncie, and Muncie agreed to run. And of course, Muncie got trounced by
Arthur Fletcher.
Yeah, Arthur Fletcher.
Who could have been the first statewide African-American statewide elected official.
Right.
And one would have thought that Muncie, given his fame, I mean, for me, a kid growing up in the 50s, hydroplanes, who's telling who for your career as a hydroplane announcer, hydroplane, Rooster Tails met summer in Seattle.
Oh, yeah.
Hawaii Kai and Miss Thriftway. And I remember, there's another great story there that I remember Bill Muncey subbing for Stan Borison on King's Clubhouse with Stan.
Well, Muncey once had his own television show on Channel 5.
Really?
Yes. It was staged, it came from the Moore Theater, and Bill had the orchestra. Who is the guy? He still leads an orchestra. Great saxophone player. His name escapes me, I'm sorry. Yeah. But anyway, he had the orchestra, and Bill would invite guests in, but Bill was a great saxophone player himself.
Really?
So Bill would play solo saxophones. It was a 30-minute show, and it would run every week during the winter live from the Moore Theater.
Wow.
That's an oldie but goodie memory.
Oh, it is indeed. So did Bill come to you and ask you for any advice in that campaign? He didn't run a very good campaign.
Ran a terrible campaign. Yeah. Well, he didn't really want it, I don't think.
I from reading the news releases and the press coverage of it, it didn't seem that his heart was in it any more than yours would have been. And honor notwithstanding.
Would you have time for me to tell you the story of Bill's death?
I would. That's a fascinating thing. We would.
Bill, that year, I was running the First Lady hydroplane driver in my boat, the KYYX. The year is 1982.
Who was the First Lady hydroplane driver?
Brenda Jones.
Brenda Jones.
Yeah, okay. First and only.
Wow.
The sport needs something like that. Anyway, Bill that year couldn't win a race because Dean Chenoweth had the big new Budweiser with the big new V12 Griffin engine. You know, it was just overpowering everybody. And drive as he would, Bill couldn't beat Dean Chenoweth. It gets down to the last race of the year in Acapulco. And it's our first time out of the country, of course, with the hydroplanes. Bill does something uncharacteristic. On Thursday in Acapulco, he had rented a suite. Now, Bill was cheap as hell. I mean, you know, he had rented a suite and had all kinds of hors d'oeuvres set up, and he invited all the drivers and the owners up there. And Bill stood and made this lecture that this is our first time out of the country and international exposure, and it doesn't matter who wins. It's just that we put on a great show. Let's stay side by side, you know. Let's thrill the fans. Now I take you to race day. Bill, in the first heat, started way on the outside and was moaning and groaning that he was having carburation problems. And he did finish third in that heat, but looked very bad. The second heat, same thing. He said, you know, my boat's just running terribly. Dean, you got it, you know. And we get down to the final. And Bill was pitted right next to my boat, and I saw this. When Jim Lucero had built the boat was flighty. Oh, well, that boat would get up. So he had created an air damper across between the sponsons that dropped down about this far, made out of glass, and the suction would keep the bow of Bill's boat down. It had run that way for 3 years and kept him upright, you know. I watched as Bill took that air damper off the boat, number one, and two, loaded in 3 additional nitrous oxide bottles, which were used for extra acceleration in those days. Bill said to everybody, he said, don't let me get in the way in the final heat of the driver's meeting. He said, I'm having such carburetor problems. He said, you know, I'll just stay to the outside and try and make it look good. And those were all just BS's, because Bill was on the outside, and as they came down to the start, he cut through all the rooster tails, grabbed the number 1 lane, streaked into the first turn, went through, and going up the back stretch was ahead of Dean Chenoweth by 300 yards. And we watched as he went airborne. And that was it. Bless his heart, he just tweaked his way to heaven.
And his competitive juices wouldn't let him do anything but go for the lead, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
I'm so glad that we got that story, because the role that you played in announcing hydro races on Lake Washington for all those years, I think that's a really important contribution to the history of sport in the Northwest, and to have that coda to the life of this great racer and your good friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
I'll tell you another quick story. I mentioned lived in Newport Shores.
Yes.
And sitting on the deck one Sunday afternoon in the spring, and here came Bill up the canal in his red Donzi, and he was divorced at the time. He'd been divorced for a couple of 3 years. And he pulled up to my dock, and I went down and helped him tie up. And he said, Bill, Pat, we came to talk to you. We're going to have a serious conversation. He says, this is Fran, and I met Fran. And I said, well, let's go up on the deck. So we went up on the deck. He said, here's the reason we're here. He says, we met a week and a half ago, but we have fallen in love. And last night we decided we should get married. But he said, after just 10 days, he said, that probably doesn't make sense. But he says, Fran has always listened to you, and she trusts you. And he says, you know, I trust you. So we came to you for advice on whether we should get married or not. So I said, well, so I went and got a legal tablet from my office. And I said, let's write down the reasons it's a good idea and a bad idea. And we talked about Bill and his kids, you know, that from his marriage and his traveling and his temperaments, and all of the things about all the things. And then we wrote down what's good about Bill. and made a bunch of questions about Fran. And after about 45 minutes, I said, well, gang, I said, look, here's where we end up. I said, there are so many good reasons that they completely overcome the negatives. I said, go for it. And Wednesday, they got married.
Can't beat that. Thank you, Pat. That's great stuff.